I hit the grass before I reached the stage. 1 second, I was walking toward my degree. The next, the world folded into a bright, humming blur. Voices bent and melted into each other. My gown tangled under me. Someone shouted my name. My phone buzzed with messages I couldn't read. The doctors called my parents. No one came. Hours later, propped on a hospital bed, I watched a photo on my sister's feed. Laughing faces around a grill, sunlight, the caption, "Family Day without the drama." A choice. It was stood across from me in a courtroom, their hands trembling, their voices thin with pleading. For the first time, I didn't move to fix it. I said, no. Where love wasn't something you felt, it was something you earned. And somehow, without anyone ever saying it out loud, I became the one who was expected to earn it the hardest. My parents never used the words responsible one, but everything about the way they treated me carved that title into my skin. If Emily cried, I was told to comfort her. If she needed help, I was told to give it. If something broke, I was told to fix it. My wants were negotiable, my needs were optional, but my usefulness? That was mandatory. There was never a moment when they sat me down and asked if I was okay. Instead, there were constant reminders of what I should be. Maria, help your sister. Maria, don't make this harder. Maria, you're stronger, you can handle it. The words sounded like praise, but they felt like chains. Chains that tightened every time I did what they asked, and tightened again when I didn't. I learned to swallow disappointment, birthdays forgotten, recitals attended only for Emily, school projects finished alone at the dinner table while they hovered over her, fixing the bow in her hair or adjusting the strap on her backpack. Eventually, I stopped expecting anything. I just worked. I helped. I endured. And each time I stepped up, they grew more comfortable stepping back. When I moved to Boston for college, I thought distance might loosen those chains, but my phone proved me wrong. The calls came like clockwork. Bills overdue, accounts short, emergencies that sounded dire enough to make my stomach twist. They always needed me. They always phrased it like I was their only hope. Just this once, they'd say, and every time I believed them. Every time I transferred money I couldn't afford to lose. Every time I stretched myself thinner to cover a responsibility that was never mine. It didn't stop. It escalated. What began as small, help me moments grew into full-blown financial dependence. They let Emily live recklessly because they had me. They let themselves ignore consequences because they had me. And every month, every year, every crisis, I told myself I could handle it. That being the strong one was better than being the forgotten one, but the truth was simpler and uglier. I was too afraid to say no. If that pattern had broken years earlier, maybe I would have walked across my graduation stage instead of collapsing before I reached it. Maybe the weight wouldn't have crushed me from the inside out. Maybe I wouldn't have woken up to a world where my own parents had chosen a backyard barbecue over my life. But patterns don't disappear just because you want them to. Mine followed me, from childhood into adulthood, straight into a courtroom. Because years after that collapse, after that ER bed and that photo captioned, "Family Day without the drama," the consequences they'd been outrunning finally caught up to them, and suddenly, they needed something bigger than my emotional labor or my bank account. They needed my legal signature, my identity, my clean record, my forgiveness. They needed me to save them again. If I had stayed the responsible one, the fixer, the dependable daughter trained to absorb every blow, I would have folded. I would have stepped between them and the consequences they earned. I would have said yes. But standing there, facing the same people who abandoned me when I hit the ground, I finally understood the stakes. This wasn't just about a loan or a forged signature. It was every moment of my life leading to this one. For the first time, the power wasn't in their hands. It was mine. I didn't realize I was the strong child until adulthood. Back then, it didn't feel like strength. It felt like being invisible in all the ways that mattered, and painfully visible in all the ways that didn't. Strength was just the name my parents gave to the responsibilities they didn't want to carry themselves. Our house wasn't loud or chaotic. It was quiet in a way that made you think everything was fine from the outside. Neighbors saw the trimmed yard, the neat curtains, the holiday lights. But inside, the balance was off, tilted so sharply toward my younger sister, Emily, that I grew up compensating for it without even thinking. My mother called her sensitive, delicate, fragile, as if those words were carved into her bones. Everything around her adjusted to accommodate that fragility, and everything around me tightened to hold it up. If Emily had a bad day, the whole house rearranged itself. If I had one, I learned to keep it quiet. I still remember being 8 years old, getting a stomach bug so severe I could barely sit upright. I lay curled on the couch, shivering, hoping someone would sit beside me. Instead, Mom rushed past me, fixing Emily's hair for a class photo retake, telling me, "Maria, sweetie, be strong, okay? Your sister needs me right now." I nodded because nodding was easier than asking for more. Asking only made me feel like I was failing a role I hadn't chosen. And that role grew with me. By middle school, I was the one who remembered deadlines, packed lunches, double-checked the locks at night because Dad often forgot, and soothed Emily whenever she spiraled. When she spilled juice all over the carpet, I cleaned it. When she burst into tears over a broken toy, I knelt beside her and fixed it while Mom hovered in the doorway praising Emily for being so expressive and praising me for being such a good helper. I didn't know the difference between affection and obligation because I never saw where one ended and the other began. 1. One memory stands out more sharply than the others. I must have been around 10. Winter break, snow outside. Emily wanted to build a snowman and I begged to go too. But Mom pulled the zipper up on Emily's coat and said, almost absent-mindedly, "Not today, Maria. You're old enough to stay inside alone. Emily needs one-on-one time." I watched from the window as they played in the yard, Dad lifting Emily into the air as she squealed, Mom snapping photos. I stood behind the curtain, unseen, holding my own gloves in my pocket until the warmth left them. That was the first time I learned how cold neglect could feel. As I grew older, the tasks shifted from emotional labor to practical labor. Emily would forget her assignments and I'd finish them for her. She would break something at home and I'd take the blame because she cried faster and louder than I could explain. Her birthdays were loud and bright, pink banners, themed cakes, 20 kids in the backyard. Mine were dim, rushed, always planned at a better time that never arrived. I stopped expecting presents. I started expecting apologies instead, soft and tired, the kind that meant nothing would change. The worst part wasn't the lack of attention, it was the expectation that I wouldn't need any. Whenever I tried to bring up something that hurt, Dad would sigh and say, "Maria, you're tougher than this." As if feelings were weaknesses, as if being the strong one meant never needing softness, reassurance, or care. Eventually, I believed him. I shaped myself into whatever kept the peace. I became quiet, efficient, useful. And in that usefulness, they found a convenience they never questioned. But small moments cracked through. The time I stayed up all night with a fever, sitting on the bathroom floor because I didn't want to wake anyone. The time I won a school award and asked if they could come to the ceremony, and Mom said she had to take Emily to a friend's birthday party instead. The time I cried alone in my room after overhearing Dad say, "At least we never have to worry about Maria." That sentence stayed with me, heavy and sharp, because it wasn't pride he was expressing. It was relief. Relief that I required so little, even as they demanded so much. These moments accumulated quietly, layer by layer, until they became the foundation of how my family saw me. Dependable, resilient, endlessly giving. And in a twisted way, that made sense to them. If something went wrong, I would handle it. If someone slipped, I would catch them. If a crisis appeared, I would absorb the impact. That pattern didn't break when I moved out. It followed me. It followed me long after childhood, through college, through jobs, through exhaustion thicker than grief. It followed me right up to the day I collapsed at my own graduation, from carrying a weight that was never mine to carry. And years later, It followed me into a courtroom, except this time, for the first time, it finally broke. Because standing there, looking at the same people who had built their lives on my strength while giving me none of theirs, I realized something simple and life-altering. I wasn't their strong child anymore. I was finally just a person who deserved to walk away. Adulthood was supposed to feel like freedom, but for me, it felt like carrying my childhood on my back, only now the weight was disguised as responsibility. When I left for Boston, I thought distance would protect me. I imagined my own apartment, my own choices, my own life. But the truth was, even hundreds of miles away, I was never entirely alone. My family traveled with me, through every notification, every request, every emergency that wasn't mine but always became mine. Boston offered me air I hadn't known before, streets filled with noise, strangers who didn't expect anything from me, a campus where I could walk without shrinking myself to fit someone else's needs. I worked hard, not because someone told me to, but because it finally felt like I was building something of my own. I took 2 jobs, one at the hospital, another at a small cafe, stacked shifts like puzzle pieces, studied late into the night, and let myself believe I was stepping into a future unshaped by childhood roles. But every time my phone lit up with my family's number, the illusion cracked. It always started the same way. A sigh, a soft plea, a crisis rooted in someone else's choices. "We're behind on the electric bill. Your dad's hours got cut. Emily maxed her card again. Just this once." That phrase followed me through my 20s like a shadow, always gentle enough to keep me from pulling away, always urgent enough to make me feel like refusing was cruelty. I sent money I couldn't spare. I covered fees I couldn't afford. I worked extra shifts because they needed help. And if I didn't help, I felt like I was failing a test I never signed up for. Every "just this once" bled into the next until the timeline blurred and the requests became routines, not exceptions. The closer I got to graduation, the more suffocating this for. The more suffocating them that my coursework intensified. My hours at the hospital increased. I barely slept. My body whispered warnings, shakes, headaches, a strange heaviness in my chest. But I ignored them the way I had ignored everything that belonged to me. Other people noticed before I did. Jenna would hand me soup and insist I sit. Mark would steady me when I swayed at work. Even Dr. Lane told me gently, "You carry too much." He didn't know the half of it. In the months before graduation, life tightened like a fist around my ribs. Every minute was accounted for. Every bill was looming. Every family request felt heavier than the last. I kept telling myself that once I walked across that stage, once the degree was finally in my hands, everything would ease. I clung to that image, me in a cap and gown, the sun on my face, my parents in the crowd, maybe even proud of me for something that wasn't service to them. But hope is a fragile thing when it's built on people who've never shown up the way you needed. The morning of my graduation felt unreal. Boston glowed brightly, the air crisp and alive, banners fluttering like promises. Families filled the lawn with balloons and flowers. I scanned the sea of faces for the people who were supposed to be mine. Nothing. Still, I told myself they were on the way. Traffic, maybe. A delay. Something understandable. My name echoed across the loudspeakers. I stood. My heart hammered unevenly. The world blurred at the edges. My legs felt like someone had swapped them with hollow wooden stilts. I took one step, then another. The stage tilted sharply to the left. My vision closed in like a tunnel. Voices became distant, muffled, like they were underwater. And before I could understand what was happening, the floor rushed toward me. I collapsed before I reached the first step. Gasps swept through the crowd. Hands reached for me. Doctors ran. A coldness climbed up my arms, and I felt myself slip away from everything: sound, light, consciousness. The last thing I remembered was a noise like distant thunder and the faint hum of a machine. When I woke in the ER, wrapped in a warm blanket, with an IV needle tugging at my skin, Dr. Whitman told me I had fainted from severe exhaustion. My body had finally done what my mind refused to do. Stop. I asked one question with a throat made of sandpaper. Did my parents come? He hesitated, the kind of pause that means everything. We called them several times, he said softly. No one arrived. Hours later, still trembling, I finally checked my phone. Notifications flooded the screen, but only one mattered, a new tag from Emily. In the picture, my family stood around the backyard grill, laughing, sunlight warm on their faces. The caption read, "Family Day without the drama." They hadn't missed my ceremony. They hadn't been stuck in traffic. They hadn't been trying to get to me. They chose not to come. Lying in that hospital bed, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel anger yet. What I felt was clarity, sharp, clean, devastating. My collapse wasn't an accident. It was the culmination of years of carrying burdens that were never mine. And the people who watched me fall were never the ones who would help me stand again. After graduation, my body healed faster than my relationship with my family ever could. I left the hospital with trembling hands and a quiet resolve I didn't yet have words for. I didn't confront them. I didn't demand explanations. I simply stepped back. Bit by bit, I stopped picking up every call. I stopped sending money I didn't have. I stopped volunteering to fix problems that weren't mine. For the first time in my life, I let silence be my answer. And my silence was the one thing they never knew how to handle. Months turned into a year, tangled into 2. The space between us stretched, and in that space, I built the life I had always imagined. A small studio with sunlight pooling across the floor every morning. A clinical job where people thanked me without expecting everything from me. Friends who checked in on me without needing anything in return. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. And peace, I learned, was better than anything I'd grown up with. I didn't erase my family. I just stopped being the glue that held everything together. And surprisingly, the world didn't fall apart. At least, not mine. Theirs did. It started on a normal evening years later, just as the sun dipped behind the skyline. I had just walked into my apartment, shoes half off, when my phone started buzzing. One call, then another, then another. It didn't stop. The screen lit up in frantic, overlapping notifications. Mom, Dad, home, Emily. Dozens of missed calls. Rapid texts stacking on top of each other so quickly, my phone vibrated like it was shivering. For a moment, the old instinct kicked in. Someone's hurt. Someone's missing. Someone needs me. Blindly. And when I opened the messages, the truth hit me with a cold, familiar weight. Not one of those calls had come during my collapse years before. Not one during my ER stay. Not one when I'd been too weak to stand. They only cared now that they needed something. The messages spilled down the screen in frantic lines. Pick up, Pums. This is serious. Maria, you can't ignore us. We need you. Emily is in trouble. That line, Emily is in trouble, didn't surprise me. It was always Emily. But what came next made my stomach twist. My father sent a screenshot, a bank notice, a loan statement, a signature, my name, my signature. Except it wasn't mine. It was a copy, slanted, uneven, taken from a rental application I'd once filled out back home. An old file, a digital scan, repurposed without my knowledge. They had forged my name. I scrolled further, my pulse thick in my ears. More documents, more numbers. A loan far larger than anything I could have ever approved. Payments overdue, dates circled, the kind of paperwork that clings like a shadow. Teeth. Was a voicemail, too. My mother, her voice thin and brittle, saying, "Maria, call the bank and fix this. They won't talk to us. They need you to confirm everything. We can't lose the house. Please. Fix this." The words felt like an old chain being thrown over my shoulders. But this time, it didn't settle. This time, it slid off. Because somewhere between that hospital bed and this apartment, something in me had changed. Their emergencies no longer eclipsed my common sense. Their panic no longer rewrote my reality. And forgery, that was something even they couldn't disguise with guilt. I didn't call them back. Instead, I texted someone I trusted. "Can you come over? I need you." 20 minutes later, Jenna stepped into my apartment with the steadiness of a lighthouse in a storm. She listened as I explained, her face hardening as she scrolled through the screenshots. "Maria," she said quietly, "this isn't just manipulative. This is illegal. They committed fraud." The word hit me with a clarity sharper than any betrayal I'd known. Fraud. Not a misunderstanding, not an accident, a crime. For years, I had let them take and take and take, my time, my money, my strength, my health. But this was different. This crossed a line even my childhood conditioning couldn't excuse. Jenna helped me open my laptop. We gathered every message, every document, every timestamp, and for the first time in my life, I didn't defend my family. I didn't soften the edges of the truth. I laid it out plainly, and the plainness was devastating. Later that night, I sat on a video call with a financial attorney Jenna recommended. My hands shook as I held the phone. His eyes scanned the documents and he exhaled long and slow. "This is clear forgery," he said. "You owe nothing. They used your identity without permission. The bank will need your statement, and depending on the severity, this may go to court." Court. The word made my heartbeat vibrate in my ribs, not from fear, but from something sharper. Something like justice. I thought of that graduation stage, of the silence from the bleachers, of that backyard photo captioned, "Family Day without the drama," of the girl I was, collapsing under a weight she'd been told to carry alone. And I realized this moment was inevitable. Clang moved quickly. Paperwork filed. Investigations opened. Statements recorded. My family, who had once counted on me to save them from everything, now found themselves facing something they couldn't escape. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing beside them. I was standing across from them, and I wasn't afraid. Courtrooms have a specific kind of silence, not empty, but waiting. The kind that sits in your chest and makes even your breathing feel too loud. When I stepped through the double wooden doors, that silence pressed against me like a hand. For years, I had walked into rooms where my family held all the control, where I was the one absorbing blame, responsibility, or expectations. But here, in this quiet, polished room, the balance had finally shifted, and they knew it. My parents were already seated at the defendant's table, stiff and tense, like two people who had run out of places to hide. My mother kept smoothing the hem of her sweater, pulling invisible threads. My father sat upright, jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitch from across the room. Emily wasn't there. Whether out of shame or convenience, I didn't know. And for once, I didn't wonder. When they saw me, my mother's expression cracked first. Something like relief, something like desperation. She lifted her hands slightly, as if she expected me to rush over and comfort her the way I always had. I didn't move. My legs felt rooted to the floor. My father's eyes met mine next. There was no softness there, only a kind of stern scolding I recognized from childhood, the look that said, "Fix this, do your job." But beneath it now was a flicker I had never seen on his face before. Forgive. Mitigate me. My attorney guided me to my seat, his voice calm and measured, a grounding presence in a room that felt too bright. Papers rustled around us, low murmurs swelled, then faded. When the judge entered, every sound snapped into place. The proceedings began the way all betrayals eventually do, with evidence. The bank representative spoke first, explaining the timeline of forged signatures, the loan applications, the overdue payments, the attempts to contact me. She talked about financial patterns, irregularities, and how the handwriting didn't match my verified documents. Every sentence slid across the room like a blade. My parents shifted uncomfortably, but they didn't look at each other. They knew exactly what they had done. Then my attorney stood. His voice was steady, clinical, almost indifferent. the kind of tone that made the truth feel even heavier. "The plaintiff," he said, nodding toward me, "did not sign any of the attached documents. The signature was copied from an unrelated file from 8 years ago. This constitutes identity theft and financial fraud. We have provided copies of the original documents as well as the digital footprint showing unauthorized access." Each word landed with the finality of a gavel. Refrigerate out a soft, choked sound. My father exhaled sharply, shifting in his seat. For a moment, I felt something twist inside me, an echo of the girl who used to rush in whenever they faltered. But echoes are only memories, and memories aren't obligations. Then came the moment I had been dreading. The judge turned toward me. "Ms. Bennett, please approach." My legs felt light, almost disconnected, as if my body was still learning what it meant to stand for myself. I stepped forward, each footfall sounding louder than it should. The judge's eyes were steady, neutral, but not unkind. "Ms. Bennett," he said, "we need verbal confirmation from you. Did you authorize your parents to sign your name on these documents?" Nick's my parents both leaned forward slightly, like the question was a cue, like this was the moment I was supposed to save them. My mother whispered, "Maria, please." Her voice broke on the last letter. My father's eyes drilled into me. "Do what you always do." The judge waited. And in that paused breath, I saw everything at once. The birthdays they never came to, the sick days I spent alone, the countless bills they'd pushed onto my shoulders, the graduation stage blurring beneath me, the ER lights, the backyard photo captioned, "Family Day without the drama," the forged signature, the frantic calls only when they needed something, the years of being the solution to problems that weren't mine. I saw the girl I used to be. And then, I let her go. "No," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I did not authorize it." The room went still. My mother gasped like I had slapped her. My father's face hardened, then cracked in a way I didn't expect. His shoulders slumped, not in remorse, but in the realization that I wasn't going to bend this time. The judge nodded. "Thank you." I returned to my seat, my heartbeat loud but steady. Then it was their turn. My mother spoke first, her voice trembling like thin glass. She apologized, but even her apology felt rehearsed, the kind crafted to sound small and fragile enough to trigger guilt. She talked about stress, about oversight, about thinking it would be temporarily helpful. She never said the word forgery. She never said the word wrong. My father followed. His voice was low, controlled, but edged with frustration. He talked about family obligations, about how things used to be, about how he assumed I would understand. He said they were desperate. He said they were counting on me to help. Familiarity, he looked directly at me and said, "You know Emily couldn't handle this. You're the strong one." Fluorescent hit me like a cold wind. The strong one. Even here, in front of a judge, under scrutiny, that was still the role they expected me to play. They didn't want accountability. When the lawyers finished and the judge reviewed the last of the documents, my parents stared at me with a kind of desperation I had never seen before. It was raw, unmasked. My mother whispered, "Maria, please, we could lose everything." Everything. Those words echoed with a strange hollowness, because for years I had been the everything they leaned on, their wallet, their counselor, their stability, their shield. And losing that wasn't a tragedy. It was the truth catching up. 9. The judge announced the next procedural steps: penalties, repayment responsibilities, further investigation. My parents sagged under the weight of the consequences they had earned, and as the hearing ended, the room emptied around us. My parents remained seated, staring up at me like they were waiting for the old version of me to reappear. My mother reached for my arm. "Maria, we're your family." I stepped back. Crimson. "No," I said quietly. "You were my responsibility, and that was never the same thing." My father opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, the roles were reversed. They were the ones afraid, and I was the one walking away. I turned toward the exit, the echo of my footsteps filling the room that had once held their power. But not anymore. In that courtroom, surrounded by evidence of every line they'd crossed, I realized something simple and freeing. They weren't losing me. They were losing the version of me they could control. And I was finally free. When the courtroom doors closed behind me, the sound echoed like something splitting cleanly down the middle. Half of that sound was the world I had lived in for 27 years. The other half was the world I was choosing now. But even with the walls between us, I could still feel the weight of what had just happened pressing against my ribs. The moment I said no wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive like a lightning strike. It came the way real turning points do. Quietly, steadily, without permission, and for once, entirely on my terms. But that wasn't the end. The hearings weren't over. The judge needed additional statements, more confirmation, more clarity. The next session was scheduled a week later, and that week stretched like a long, taut thread, every hour thick with the truth that what I had said, what I had finally said, couldn't be undone. Burn of the second hearing felt different. I woke up without that familiar rush of panic that used to dictate my every move. My body wasn't light, not yet, but it wasn't weighed down by the invisible demands I'd carried for years. I dressed slowly, deliberately, my hands steady. When Jenna drove me to the courthouse, she didn't fill the silence with reassurance. She didn't need to. She simply sat beside me, a presence that made the air feel bearable. Inside, the same stale chill lingered, but this time I wasn't afraid of it. My parents were already there, sitting close enough together that their shoulders touched. They looked smaller than I remembered, like people whose power had shrunk under the fluorescent lights. My mother's eyes found me immediately. They were red-rimmed, swollen with a kind of sorrow that might have once broken me. My father's expression was rigid, carved out of something between anger and disbelief. But beneath that, I saw the same flicker of uncertainty that had crossed his face during the last hearing. He didn't know who I was anymore, and he wasn't supposed to. When the judge took his seat, we all rose. My knees didn't wobble. My breath didn't stutter. I sat down with a quiet resolve humming through my chest, soft but unshakable. The proceedings began with paperwork, records, bank statements, calls logged, emails printed out. The kind of evidence that strips emotion from a situation and leaves only fact, bare and undeniable. Each document was another thread pulled from the fabric of the story my parents had always told. We're doing our best. We only need a little help. You understand. But facts don't bend for convenience, and under oath, neither did I. The judge reviewed the new material, then looked up. "Ms. Bennett," he said, "before we proceed, I need you to confirm once more that you did not provide consent for your information to be used." Clang, there it was, the moment again. The same moment, but heavier this time. Bisexual. Now the denial would land with consequences, not confusion. I felt my mother's gaze burning into me, felt my father stiffen. The silence stretched like the breath before a storm breaks, and I stayed calm. "No," I said, "I did not give any permission." Between a gasp and a sob, my father's hand curled into a fist on the table, but neither of them spoke. They couldn't. The truth had closed around us, firm as iron. The judge nodded. "And to confirm, you are not willing to take responsibility for the loan on their behalf?" This was the question they were waiting for. This was the one that mattered. Naked, father leaned forward. "Maria," he hissed under his breath, as if whispering could will me back into the daughter he once commanded. "Think about what you're doing. This will ruin us." My mother clasped her hands together. "Please, sweetheart, we're your family. You can't let this happen." But I knew now that family isn't defined by who shares your name. It's defined by who protects your peace. And for years, I had been protecting everyone but myself. I straightened. My voice came out soft but razor clear. I will not take responsibility. Not legally, not financially, not emotionally, not anymore. The words didn't tremble. They didn't hesitate. They simply existed, solid and final. My mother broke. Her shoulders caved inward as she whispered, "How could you do this to us?" The question should have cut me. Once it would have. But now it only revealed the truth they couldn't hide. They didn't see what they had done to me, only what my refusal meant for them. The judge's gavel hit the block. "Very well," he said. "The liability remains solely with the defendants." My parents sagged as if someone had lifted a floorboard beneath them. Their faces shifted from pleading to panic to a hollow kind of realization that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the consequences they had run from for too long. The rest of the session moved in blurred motions, sentences read aloud, penalties assigned, the notation of a fraud investigation that would continue without my involvement. Each decision landed like another door closing gently but firmly behind me. When the judge dismissed us, the room emptied slowly. My parents didn't stand right away. They looked stunned, as though they were still waiting for me to rush over and make everything okay, as though the old version of me might suddenly reappear out of habit. But habits break the moment you refuse to feed them. My mother reached out weakly. "Maria, wait." I stopped but didn't turn. "We're your parents," she said, voice cracking. "You don't understand. We had no one else." I closed my eyes for a breath that didn't hurt the way breaths used to. "You had me," I said, "and you used me until there was nothing left." My father tried one last tactic, anger. "You're abandoning us," he snapped. I finally turned, meeting his gaze without fear. "No, I'm letting your choices belong to you." They stared at me like they were seeing a stranger. Maybe they were. I walked toward the exit with each step feeling like a piece of armor I had needed my whole life was finally settling into place. As the heavy courtroom doors closed behind me, the air outside hit my face, a cold, clean rush that tasted like something I'd never known before. Freedom. And for the first time, I didn't look back, didn't wait for a call or a message or a crisis. I simply walked forward, knowing the truth in my bones. Saying no wasn't betrayal. It was the first honest thing I had ever said to them. In the weeks after the final hearing, life didn't transform all at once. There was no sudden rush of triumph, no cinematic sunrise. Healing arrived the way exhaustion once had, quietly, steadily, in ways small enough to miss unless you were paying attention. I spent days closing every legal and financial door that had ever tied me to my family. I changed passwords, removed my information from shared accounts, and documented everything the attorney suggested. Each click, each signature, each confirmation felt like cutting loose a thread I'd tangled myself in for years. And when the last one was gone, the silence that followed wasn't cold. It was clean. My world grew softer without their crises filling every corner of it. I settled deeper into my small studio, letting the morning light spill across the floors. I took long walks through Boston without checking my phone every other minute. I learned what it felt like to breathe without bracing for impact. At work, I felt present in ways I never had before. Jenna became my emergency contact, not because she had to be, but because she showed up every time without expecting anything in return. Slowly, my body forgave me. The tremors faded. The heaviness lifted. I slept, really slept, for the first time in years. And sometimes, when the wind cut sharply against my face on my walk home, I thought about that graduation stage, about how I collapsed under the weight of a life I'd been taught to carry alone. I used to think that moment was my lowest point. Now I know it was the first step out. My body made the decision my heart was too afraid to choose. Choosing myself didn't ruin anyone's life. It saved mine. To anyone who's ever shouldered more than they were meant to, Who's ever been called strong when all they wanted was to be seen? Your strength isn't measured by how much you endure. Sometimes it's measured by the moment you finally let go. If this story resonates with you, share your thoughts below. And if you're rebuilding your life piece by piece, just know, you're not alone. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.